Okay, thank you all for coming. So great to see some new faces, some artists, visual artists. We were just talking in class about how Sara and I both have spent a lot of time reading and looking at reading about and looking at paintings in relation to our writing of poems. So that's a connection we've been making internally. So it's happy to see it happening externally here. This is the first reading in the Fall Visiting Writers series, and I'd like to thank supporters of the series, including the English department, the Provost's office, and for some of our readings, we have special support from the Modern Languages Department, the Diversity Center, the Office of the Provost, the President's Office, and the Brainerd Writing Center. There's a great series of readings this semester. There are 3 more after this. On October 22nd, Afa M. Weaver will read poetry at 7 p.m. That's a Thursday. And on October 27th, Matvey Yankelevich will read poetry, prose, and translations from the Russian. And Lisa Fishman will read poems. And finally, on November 10th, poet, scholar, and rabble-rouser Joshua Clover will give a public lecture first at 2:30 p.m. in this room. And the lecture's on poetry and riots, and the title is The Balance of Forces in 1967, and it's connected to a study on riots, the cycle of riots that he's been doing that's coming out on Verso in the spring. And then at 7 p.m., he'll give a poetry reading here in Neiman. All of those events you're most welcome at, and they'll be great. They're all listed on the website for details, and the books will be for sale at each reading. I have Sarah's book here tonight, and they'll also be for sale in the bookstore for the rest of the semester, and they're in the library. So you can, if you want to check out more about the books, you can find them in those places. Please do. Tonight, I'm very happy to welcome Sara Mumolo to campus. Official details, she's the author of Mortar from Omnidawn, published in 2013, still shiny. And she's the program manager for the MFA program at St. Mary's College of California. And she founded and curated the Studio One reading series in Oakland, which she was directly involved with from 2008 to 2012. And that's where we first met in person after corresponding, and where I'll see her again on Friday, strangely enough, as I go out that way. We also have here a rare copy in the library, although it's temporarily checked out, of a chapbook called March, published by Cannibal Books in 2011. We have one of about 80 copies that exist in the world. Her poems have appeared in 1913, A Journal of Forms, Lana Turner, Pen Poetry Series, Volta, and Volt, among others. She lives in Oakland, California. In a new poem from a series under construction, as I said, I don't even know if it's a series or if it's under construction, but they're very new poems, some of which we'll get to hear tonight. Sara writes, "Distraction finds its walking pace, the meeting about the committee forms." That sort of hit home for me. And its concern with what occupies us, even as we try to occupy our world in turn, even as we try a counter-occupation, fills these poems and the poems in Mortar and this poet, all the things that try to take up our time. In Mortar, she writes, in this book here, the mechanism of surrealism is an activity, certainly a loaded sentence. The mechanism playing against the activity, a danger and a possibility in such action. As Andre Breton said in the Manifesto of Surrealism, "But it is true that we would not dare venture so far. It is not merely a question of distance. Threat is piled upon threat. One yields, abandons a portion of the terrain to be conquered. This imagination, which knows no bounds, is henceforth allowed to be exercised only in strict accordance with the laws of an arbitrary utility. That is, one is allowed to attend to language and the world as long as it is in the meeting about the committee forms, or if its value can be properly assessed, or as long as it meets a clearly stated goal and aims at a pre-formulated outcome." In Mumolo's poems, it's from a long series in Mortar, the quote I read, called Money on It, calls attention to the activity required and its repeated unveiling as subject to the laws of these kinds of arbitrary utility. So where is the freedom in that? The poems and the poet are always looking and always calling our attention to those arbitrary utilities that weigh on us. In another recent poem from the series, or non-series, of poems newly being generated that I mentioned, I want to read one in its entirety because I loved it, and it seems to enact something in this. It's called, as many are, they have titles that relate to a period of time. So 22 months. Cotton orbs float, sideways screens. What are these? I ask the group of writers entering the grocery. Apocalyptic narratives, white clouds yanked from sky. We see a moment of freedom, the sideways screens. Maybe they almost disappear, those screens. At that moment when the poet observes the cottonwood orbs, a beautiful planetary word for those little floating seed pods. When the poet observes and asks poetry's question, what are these? Before the writers, those screens cut in with apocalyptic narratives, which the speaker, as I read it, sees as a violence in itself, white clouds yanked from sky. But at the same time, the white clouds bring the reader back to the poem's beginning, and the cottonwood orbs for a moment there again to be unknown, to be the answer to the question, what are these? Please welcome Sara Mumolo.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me. I had a great time talking with Rick's poetry class. So I'm going to kind of jump all over the place. I'll read a poem from Mortar, and then I'll read some of the work that Rick just quoted. That's what I was saying in class, that's in a generative phase that I feel very protective of. So even though I'm reading it out loud, it's still in the generative phase. And then I'm going to play a video. So we're going to kind of jump all over the place. It'll be fun. I can't hide you, the rock cried out. Because the mechanism of surrealism is an activity, not an image, I find embrace in description, where staging of hours counts closer stars and fails capitalism, so we may conjoin where air does not. In San Francisco's parks, a fog confetti. We unfasten lids to open brief eyes across lawns. This is where we ask, what's the matter with you, rock? We mouth, power. Ducks beak away their feathers, their plume in limbo insults clouds. Under this state, how we bankrupt separation in lieu of burning cigarettes through cotton money. Breath cleaves, you're peering through these holes, when every tree suddenly scents of cultivation. Variety is the plastic we make invisible. Industry is everything, even gardenias. Okay, and I after I wrote the book, I had like a period that I've been jokingly referencing as the spell of non-writing, where I didn't really write for 2 years, which meant I wrote like, maybe 6 poems, and or what could be called poems. And so I thought I'd read one of those, which I think was my way into the new work, but also kind of relates to what we were talking about in class about recording stuff on your phone and being in transit and just sort of a record of your experience and how that can kind of also lead you into a poem. It's a poem that's referencing something I read, which is a conceptual poem about how to kill your wife, which was basically a poem that said how to kill your wife, and then it had these Amazon reviews of like rope and hammers and I had such a like visceral response to it. I couldn't really write a poem to it. I had to like speak a poem to it. Top places to breastfeed. Today I read a conceptual poem about how to kill your wife while I was breastfeeding, while I was hand pumping in my 96 Honda Civic, where only one window rolls down, but it doesn't matter because it was raining. Today I was pumping in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in the family bathroom of the Museum of Art, while writing notes on my iPhone about work, about how I wish I could be writing a poem. Then I went to a poetry reading, where I read poetry with 3 other poets at McNally Jackson Bookstore in Manhattan, and the wizard Keith Waldrop read poems past us all. But I hadn't pumped in hours, and my breasts hurt, so I asked if I could pump in the employee bathroom. When I said what pump meant from breasts, they looked at me blankly. When I tried to plug the pump into the outlet, it didn't work. The outlet, the bookstore, wasn't powerful enough. There wasn't enough power, and I felt like a baby horse, shaky and unprepared, using a pump without batteries, that my boyfriend, who I call my husband, but is really more of a partner, carried around Manhattan all day, except when we were at the Museum of Art, because he checked the backpack. Today I read a conceptual poem about how to kill your wife while breastfeeding at 3 a.m. in my desk chair, because I don't have a rocking chair, but my desk chair is high-backed and swivels from side to side, and I wore one of those belted pillows around my waist so baby can lay his head, no his ear, on the pillow, and it's soft but supportive. Today I pumped in my office at work with no window, but with a skylight in my office, which I share now, but didn't before maternity. And the air conditioner that hangs on the wall that isn't really a wall, but is more like a layer of fat between me and the outside world or hallway wouldn't shut off. So it was cold, but only I was cold. Because I've never seen the woman I share my office with. Someone once said she has 3 offices. Because economy of scarcity. Because contemporary grammar made a new preposition where kid says why and parent says because. Today I read a conceptual poem about how to kill your wife while breastfeeding at the back table of a sushi restaurant with 3 friends drinking sake. I was holding my baby's head in the crook of my elbow, but it got sweaty and he didn't like it. While I was breastfeeding under one of those covers called a breast friend. And he didn't like being exiled, or it was too hot in the crook, not really friendly at all. Today I pumped in the Atlanta airport women's restroom at the sink while people walk past, and I wore one of those bras for hands-free pumping, which also meant I wore a tinge of shame I knew I shouldn't feel, the way a dairy cow must feel about seeing a carton of whole milk alongside a conceptual poem about how to kill your wife. Okay. And then I took a residency in Vermont, because clearly I needed to relax, for 2 weeks. And I was telling the class that the first few days I just had to read. I couldn't even remember how to do this thing called writing anymore, which luckily I didn't get nervous about that. But, and then the last week there, I wrote these poems. And so, so I'm in the phase now where I'm trying to write more of them until the next residency, until the next time away. 24 months. I should also say this is the first time I've read them at a reading. So we'll all see how it goes together. 24 months. The mind saturates non-religious, neither mournful nor nostalgic thought. Distance is not the disaster. Distraction finds its walking pace. The meeting, about the committee forms. 23 months. We have no access to that which has already touched us, the horror, the honor of mothering. 11 weeks. We are the peons, she whispers in the fluorescent conference room. That is why we need him. 12 weeks. One's disaster is urgent, emergent, emergency. Every day I open the laptop's lid, I unpower. One fails as one accomplishes. What are today's emergencies? She says every day for 3 years, my superior. Windowless room where the leaves sag. To lend oneself to life in order to continue dying. The administrator does not care that I accomplish, only that accomplishment happens. Cannot resurrect Berryman in dreams, yet the institution wails on. 24 months. Fuck on the Green Mountains reverbs through the valley where every rain is a ballet. The robin sings at each relief. No one names the human scream. Guyane stampede after days of hail. Face reading for ether or wood. 6 months. Thoughts happen the way tasks happen, the O cry. Head, hands, feet, a muslin series of folds with living inside. Where limits meet, where the synthesizer replaces symphony. When I think of them in a past life reading Bei Dao, I desire. 10 months. I open a box of Dead to see how the dragonfly's winged psychedelics have changed since I was last here. Sometimes I open a box and there's just dust. Before. Every man bribes the failure dailiness provokes. There will never be enough money, my mother says when I tell her I'm pregnant. "15 months. Do pronoun police really exist?" she asks her father in medias res. 18 months. Natality fails into the simulacrum of maternity, to mend the cry before it opens into sound. I lose my toenail to your boot in the dark among the opera of malcontent. The survival cry we both melodize. 22 months. Cottonwood orbs float, sideways screens. What are these? I ask the group of writers entering the grocery. Apocalyptic narratives, white clouds yanked from sky. 21 months. Mid-morning drug deal wakes us. Cracked, expensive phones we yell into and say, "I'm not yelling." Toddler James Brown dance, pat, 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 pat. Scrape the bumper makes pulling out. We arrive at rage, which rages nothing, amounts to nothing, abandons nothing, says nothing except itself. Dirty dish, soapy dish, crack knuckle rash. To vanish into a sleeper whose only presence is absence is the dream. 0 months. The newborn's first way home. I never forgive being told, sit in the front. Car seat in the back faces backward. Too many guests lounge on the stoop. Yielding rubs its femaleness all over my body until my body it decays. "25 months. They use power tools to cut a steam pipe, navigating a tunnel and surfacing out of a manhole. I was scared to see your door cracked last night, the artist said at lunch. The two of them could be anywhere. This is a governor's worst nightmare, read the closed caption. Only news revisited while on the East Coast. The robin prances quietly, uncharacteristically, next to the screen. Their accomplice pled for them to kill her husband. They fled and fled and fled and fled and were shot. 9 months. Through morning's grayscale, we walk until caution tape. You are as old as I was pregnant, only pregnancy is 10 months. I feel like they shot first, said Deandra Butler, mother of Demoria Hogg's 8-year-old son. I place your sleeping body into the car seat, into the car, and weep. 24 months. I know immediately the hands of the crocheted neon hanging bowls. Air fattens, crowds the gallery, bumping into someone more important than myself. Outside, riders filled the Adirondacks chatting about love. Arizona, she said, did not work for me because I was not open to someone outside my own nationality. 13 months. Feminism enters the poem, death enters the poem, disaster enters the poem, politics enters the essay, environment enters, rhetoric enters the poem, the maniac cry leaves the poem, fucking enters the poem, then it formally feels false and retires. 4 months. Tears fall down your face at 101 days old. It was 100 days before you wept, 100 days before you suffer. 2 months. Darwin says, "It is not a little remarkable that sympathy with the distress of others should excite tears more freely than our own distress. Hunger wakes you. I read about the ne cry on the held screen, the light by which I see your feed. Might remember it more fondly than it was." 8 months. You read that green indicates success and red is the color of failure. You read that 10% of males cannot differentiate between these two colors. This is, of course, culturally variant. The signify, not the percentage of men that can see. You read that red makes women more desirable to men, or was it that men are more desirable to women? A woman's failure is desirable. Red causes people to act more forcefully, faster is what you read. Long wavelengths of red feel arousing to say on the tongue. Green's short wavelengths tailor the grasses. We fail to touch each other months after he is born. I wanted to be the first to see his eyes, and you put his face near to mine. We try to stay green. We forget if success has a color. We forget what success wears like on our limbs. We stay calm and awake. Continuous. In Notes on Form and Belief, Lisa Robertson writes, "I would prefer not to continue to reproduce solely that belief I have institutionally received. But like belief, caretaking is a behavior. On the internet, a child's tantrum lives forever." 22 months. To understand crying, one understands laughing. The grip around my finger enacts vernacular, your first language. For months, only 2 of us in the world understand what you say. I hold to the other one of us, to the witness to gravidity, to the disappearance of being into the background upon which you exist. Okay, that seems good. Okay, so I'm going to play you a video to end the reading here. It's 2 poems. One poem is in the book. Another poem is kind of a stray. It doesn't have a book. So, and it's not really published anywhere online. The video is by my friend Pablo Lopez, and the collaboration came out of him actually making videos with my husband, who's a musician, and he was doing these kind of weird soundscapes for his other video project, and then they found like audio of me reading poems, practicing for like a reading, and they stole it, and then they made a video. And then, of course, I was like, that's not cool, like you can't just steal my poems and like put them to music and video, like no way. So they were like, okay, well, now we've convinced you to collaborate with us, because I didn't want any part of collaboration. And so this was our final piece. And I mean, this is like hockey territory, right? So this video, you'll see, some of you might know it, but it's from '82.
the called back wreck of things. Our world cannot be more up to the minute. I would have put it on mouth as mouth, see, sound, whole. The clock exhausts its knocking decision. A finger's echo on my chest after the cough chimes down. The stakes, airier than scare to material. Lesion-struck moon, impossible to sight or arouse. Sunbather's leisure out, cloaked. My incessant need to tear static without knowing what is. Next, the predatory fin floats without floating. We fumble to get our hands in place. Even the victim stroke, a truck packed with color. I can't help but watch my bodies leap from the chariot. Every seat in the odd upkeep and joust. Move over now for what is obsolete. Shaky hearse of rehearsed preoccupations. A bag's imprint across my breast acknowledges that place we flee spoils what each territory demands. All that crap in my chest abides the unattended rotunda at my hips. Veneer over vision, baiting the fooled procession our world is. Or we enter into identity lugging risks that we are not re-entering it. Snakes are disgusting, I think, about the white flowers as negatives of the running woman's blank eye sockets. Near Boundary Peak, called to take up against the mission of Noah. Again, the blackbird doesn't do much, stay long, but gets out. We're most perishable in arched, delicate passes. Pointillist peaks splintered by casinos and musket. His skin shot through silk in a mush pit of blinded windows. Cut sun. We want what Holderlin first expressed, annexed to an attempt, some alliance with visible, death to defame the invisible one. I can't say what I'm doing with all this will. Waves hover and balloon, heat tunnels road, a sense of vigor, then confusion to the mustard plants. It's easy to be the daughter of a terrible man, leaving such velour air breath weaves through. His plea, stash of smoke in that hospital drawer. A baby owl's fettered wingspan and headlights and hands grasp, sails the windshield's breadth. We mentioned roadside bowls near Palmetto, where silence portends. That hotel's fraught open doors and tossed rooms. But against the storm, gray trees are naive, barely visiting landscape. A right place for habit, coming into or going out of focus.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. I think we have a little time if there was any response or question or thing you wanted to say or ask. And also there are books for sale once we receive them. Is there anything that immediately
I was trying to imagine if that was kind of like pre-gestation, like afterwards, and where was it your relationship with your son in the after months, or was it before? I'm trying to imagine, or not at all.
It's right now it goes up to 24 months. So it's written in the after, but not all the poems take place in the after, and not all the yous are my son. So I'm trying to do something interesting with the slippage of the you for the partner, the boss, the son, and then also reference the gestation period too, but they're written for the first 2 years after he was born. Yeah. So there are some that are like before, continuous. So before is like pregnancy. Afterward, just like the whole 2 years. I kind of think of those as poetry and essay.
Would you get your inspiration for this type of poem? Like you have, I'm guessing you have some sort of style. I'm just curious where you maybe get that style from.
Yeah, when we were in class, we were talking a lot about reading. I think I get my inspiration from reading, but also from film and from painting, and philosophy. I like reading kind of, so much of the information that we take in every day is like the Twitter feed and every morning I get up and I put on the news and I make me a coffee and then I listen to NPR on the way to work, and it's like all this information. And so when I sit down to actually curate my own intake of information, I want it to be like wildly different, so like Maurice Blanchot, I just want like my head to be blown off. And that's like those kind of impressive moves by other artists, I think, is what inspires me.
On the topic of reading, why do you think it's important that we read and write poetry?
Oh gosh. I'm not going to say that it's important that you write poetry. But I will say that it's important to read poetry if you want to write it. But just to read in general, I think is important. You don't not all of the stuff you read has to be poetry in order to be a good poet. But I think it's really important to know kind of like if you write a poem where your family of poets live and who they are and what they did and what they cared about. And what movies did they see? What art did they look at? So much has come before. It's important to like build that infrastructure for yourself, So many of them were friends with each other, and they wrote reviews of each other's work, and they invited each other to each other's schools, and so there's this whole network of artists, and their lives are super interesting and really rich, and you do yourself a disservice if you don't make yourself aware of that, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there something specific that you look for before writing a poem? Like some people won't start without the perfect first line, or they won't start without the perfect last line. Do you have anything like that you look for in anything you're writing before you start?
No. I just try to write whatever I'm currently obsessed with, right? And so for the chronological poems that you mentioned, I was really obsessed with my spell of non-writing. I was really obsessed with my spell of motherhood, with my spell of womanhood, with my spell of wife, and how all those things fit together, and what I was aggravated about those things, and what roles they indicated in various places that we have to interact as women in the world, and how that changed from before, being a single woman, and then being a married woman, and then being a mother and a married woman, and what those things mean. And so that's what I was obsessed with. And when I wrote the book, I was obsessed with painting, and also public spaces. So I think you just have to write with whatever you're obsessed with, and don't worry about anything to being perfect. It should just be like wild, you know.
Well, that seems like a good
Okay.
farewell to go on. Thank you, Sarah, so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.